When President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, his autopsy became one of the most botched forensic examinations in American history. From inexperienced doctors burning evidence in fireplaces to a missing brain and Secret Service agents brandishing guns at a Texas medical examiner, the mistakes and mysteries surrounding this crucial investigation have fueled 6 decades of controversy and conspiracy theories. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about JFK's autopsy. Fact 1. The lead pathologists had never done this before. When President John F. Kennedy's body arrived at Bethesda Naval Hospital on the night of November 22, 1963, the 2 Navy doctors assigned to lead what would become the most scrutinized autopsy in American history had never performed a forensic autopsy on a gunshot victim before. Commander James Humes and Commander J. Thornton Boswell were experienced pathologists who had conducted numerous autopsies during their military careers, but their work had focused on natural deaths and disease processes rather than the specialized field of forensic pathology that deals with violent deaths and criminal investigations. Neither doctor was board certified in forensic pathology, which is a specialized medical discipline requiring years of additional training beyond standard pathology certification. The field demands expertise in analyzing gunshot wounds, understanding bullet trajectories, documenting evidence for criminal prosecution, and maintaining strict protocols to preserve the chain of custody for legal proceedings. Humes had performed approximately 1,000 autopsies during his career, but these were primarily related to medical conditions and natural causes of death, rather than homicides or violent trauma. Boswell's experience was similarly lacking in the specific forensic expertise needed for such a critical examination. The decision to assign these particular doctors to Kennedy's autopsy rather than calling in experienced forensic pathologists would later be described by experts as one of the most consequential mistakes in the entire investigation. The lack of specialized training meant that crucial evidence could be missed, proper procedures might not be followed, and the findings might not hold up to the intense scrutiny that would inevitably follow the assassination of a sitting president. Fact 2. Compared to sending a child to the Philharmonic Dr. Milton Halpern, who served as New York City's chief medical examiner for more than 2 decades and was widely considered one of the world's leading forensic pathologists, did not hold back when asked about the qualifications of the doctors who performed Kennedy's autopsy. In what became one of the most memorable criticisms of the entire investigation, Halpern compared Commander Humes's assignment to the Kennedy autopsy as being like sending a 7-year-old boy who has taken 3 lessons on the violin over to the New York Philharmonic and expecting him to perform a Tchaikovsky symphony. The comparison was deliberately harsh but reflected the genuine shock and dismay felt by experienced forensic pathologists when they learned that such a crucial examination had been entrusted to doctors without proper training in their field. Halpern himself had performed more than 20,000 autopsies during his career and had testified in countless murder trials, giving him intimate knowledge of what the Kennedy autopsy required. He recognized that forensic autopsies in homicide cases demand a completely different skill set than hospital autopsies performed to determine medical causes of death. A forensic pathologist must think like both a detective and a lawyer, documenting every detail with the knowledge that their findings will be challenged in court and scrutinized by experts for years to come. The comparison to a child attempting a complex musical performance captured the enormous gap between what the situation demanded and what the assigned doctors were prepared to deliver. Halpern's stinging assessment would be echoed by numerous other forensic experts in the decades that followed, as the consequences of that inexperience became increasingly apparent through errors and omissions in the autopsy report. Fact 3. Secret Service brandished guns at hospital before Kennedy's body could even be transported to Bethesda Naval Hospital for the autopsy that would become so controversial. A tense confrontation erupted in the hallways of Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. Dr. Earl Rose, the Dallas County medical examiner, positioned himself in a doorway and refused to allow Secret Service agents to remove the president's body from the hospital. Rose was not being difficult or disrespectful. He was simply following Texas law. which clearly stated that any person who died as the result of a homicide within Dallas County had to be autopsied by the county medical examiner before the body could be released. Rose knew that proper forensic protocols required him to examine the body immediately, photograph the wounds in their original condition, and document all evidence while it was fresh. The Secret Service agents, however, were operating under their own sense of urgency and duty to protect the president, even in death, and to transport him back to Washington as quickly as possible. What began as a verbal argument quickly escalated into a physical confrontation. Witnesses reported that Secret Service agents exposed their firearms in a clear threat, though they did not actually point them at anyone. The agents then physically shoved Dr. Rose and other hospital staff aside, forcibly cleared a path through the corridor, and removed Kennedy's body from the hospital. The casket was loaded into an ambulance and rushed to Air Force One for the flight back to Washington. This confrontation meant that the legally required autopsy under Texas jurisdiction never took place, and Kennedy's body was instead taken 1,500 miles away to be examined by doctors unfamiliar with forensic gunshot analysis. Fact 4, murder wasn't a federal crime. The Secret Service agents who forcibly removed President Kennedy's body from Parkland Hospital were acting with determination and authority, but they were also acting completely outside the law. In November of 1963, there was no federal statute making it a crime to assassinate the President of the United States. This might seem shocking today, but at the time, murder was considered a state crime to be prosecuted under state law, even when the victim was the nation's chief executive. Because Kennedy had been killed in Dallas, Texas law applied, and under Texas statutes, the Dallas County Medical Examiner had exclusive jurisdiction over any homicide that occurred within county boundaries. Dr. Earl Rose had not just the right, but the legal obligation to perform an autopsy before releasing the body. The federal agents had absolutely no authority to overrule state law or remove a homicide victim's body from the jurisdiction where the crime occurred. This legal reality made the confrontation at Parkland Hospital not just a tense standoff, but an actual violation of Texas law by federal agents who believed their duty to the fallen president superseded local statutes. The situation exposed a significant gap in federal law that had never been addressed because no one had anticipated needing it. Congress would eventually close this loophole, but not until after the Kennedy assassination made it painfully obvious. In 1965, Congress passed legislation making it a federal crime to kill or kidnap the president, vice president, or other federal officials, and giving federal authorities clear jurisdiction in such cases. But for the investigation into Kennedy's death, the damage was already done. The autopsy that should have been performed by experienced forensic pathologists in Dallas was instead conducted 1,500 miles away by Navy doctors with no forensic training. Fact 5. The doctor burned his notes in his fireplace. On the Sunday morning after President Kennedy's autopsy, Commander James Humes sat in his home and made a decision that would haunt the investigation for decades. He took his original handwritten autopsy notes, along with the first complete draft of his autopsy report, and burned them in his fireplace. These were not rough scribbles or meaningless fragments. They were the primary documentation from the most important forensic examination in American history, created while Humes worked on the president's body and containing observations made in real time during the procedure. The notes included measurements, descriptions of wounds, observations about the condition of tissues and organs, and details that might have been crucial to understanding exactly what happened in Dealey Plaza. Humes would later claim that his notes had become stained with the president's blood during the autopsy, and he felt uncomfortable keeping them because he didn't want them to eventually become collector's items or morbid souvenirs, comparing them to the bloodstained chair that Abraham Lincoln had sat in when he was shot at Ford's Theater, which became a historical artifact. But destroying original autopsy notes, regardless of the reason, violated every principle of forensic pathology and criminal investigation. Those notes represented the contemporaneous record of what Humes observed before he had time to reconsider his findings, before he spoke with other doctors, and before he learned additional information that might have influenced his interpretations. The burned notes might have contained details that Humes forgot to include in his final report, observations that seemed insignificant at the time but could have proven crucial later, or measurements that were more precise than the rounded figures that appeared in the official document. Fact 6. He admitted destroying evidence 30-plus years later. When Commander Humes testified before the Warren Commission in March of 1964, he acknowledged burning his original handwritten autopsy notes, explaining that they had been bloodstained and that he had rewritten them into a clean copy before destroying the originals. The Warren Commission accepted this explanation without much concern, viewing it as an understandable desire to maintain dignity and respect for the fallen president. But what Humes did not reveal at that time was that he had also destroyed his first complete draft of the actual autopsy report itself. For more than 3 decades, this remained hidden from investigators, researchers, and the American public. It wasn't until 1996, when Humes gave a deposition for the Assassination Records Review Board, that he finally admitted he had burned not just his handwritten notes, but also an entire preliminary version of the formal autopsy report. This was a stunning revelation because it meant that an initial, complete analysis of Kennedy's wounds had been created and then deliberately destroyed before anyone outside Humes's immediate circle had seen it. The first draft might have contained observations, conclusions, or interpretations that differed from the final report, and comparing the two versions could have been enormously valuable to understanding how and why Humes's findings evolved. By burning this draft, Humes eliminated any possibility of such comparison. Despite admitting to destroying what could reasonably be considered evidence in the investigation of a presidential assassination, Humes was never charged with any crime or even seriously reprimanded for his actions. His explanation remained the same. He didn't want the documents to become macabre collectibles, but the 30-plus-year delay in revealing the full extent of what he had destroyed raised serious questions about what else might have been in that first draft that never made it into the final version. Fact 7. The Warren Commission never saw the photos. The Warren Commission, officially known as the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, was tasked with conducting the definitive investigation into Kennedy's death and producing a comprehensive report for the American people. The commission spent 10 months examining evidence, interviewing hundreds of witnesses, and analyzing every aspect of the assassination. Yet, despite the critical importance of the autopsy photographs and X-rays in understanding the president's wounds and the trajectory of the bullets that killed him, the commission members themselves never actually looked at these images. The only exception was Chief Justice Earl Warren, who reportedly viewed them briefly, but the other 6 commission members, including future President Gerald Ford, relied entirely on the testimony of the doctors who performed the autopsy and on hand-drawn diagrams that the doctors created to illustrate their findings. This decision seems almost inexplicable in hindsight, as photographs and X-rays represent objective physical evidence that doesn't depend on anyone's memory or interpretation. The doctors could describe what they remembered seeing, but the photographs showed what was actually there. The Commission's decision to forego examining this crucial evidence meant they were accepting second-hand descriptions instead of reviewing the primary sources themselves. The reasoning behind this choice has never been fully explained, though some historians suggest the Commission members may have felt that viewing such graphic images was unnecessary given the doctor's testimony, or perhaps they wanted to avoid the emotional impact of seeing the photographs. Whatever the reason, it meant that the Warren Commission's conclusions about Kennedy's wounds were based on verbal and written descriptions rather than direct examination of the photographic evidence, leaving room for questions about whether the commissioners fully understood the physical evidence they were supposed to be evaluating. Fact 8. The autopsy room was dangerously crowded. The morgue at Bethesda Naval Hospital, where President Kennedy's autopsy took place, should have been a carefully controlled environment with access limited to only those people who had a legitimate medical or investigative reason to be present. Instead, it became something closer to a crowded viewing room, packed with people who had no forensic purpose being there. Secret Service agents stood along the walls, FBI personnel observed from various positions, military aides came and went, and various other officials found reasons to be in the room during the procedure. Estimates of how many people were present at various times during the autopsy range from 20 to more than 30 individuals, all crammed into a space designed for a small medical team. This kind of crowded, chaotic environment represents a fundamental violation of proper forensic protocol that would never be tolerated in a modern criminal investigation. Every person in an autopsy room represents a potential source of contamination, a possible break in the chain of custody, and a distraction for the medical personnel trying to conduct a precise scientific examination. The doctors needed to concentrate on documenting wounds, taking measurements, collecting tissue samples, and recording their observations with meticulous accuracy. Instead, they were working in front of an audience of officials who were watching their every move, asking questions, and creating an atmosphere more like a public demonstration than a careful scientific investigation. The presence of so many observers also raised questions about who might have influenced the doctor's findings, whether subtle or overt pressure was applied to reach certain conclusions, and whether the doctors felt free to follow the evidence wherever it led, or felt constrained by the expectations of the powerful people watching them work. Fact 9. They didn't know about a critical wound. During the autopsy, Commanders Humes and Boswell found themselves facing a perplexing mystery that consumed hours of their examination. They had identified what appeared to be a bullet entrance wound in the president's upper back, but they could not find where that bullet had exited the body. They probed the wound with their fingers and with metal probes, trying to track the bullet's path through the tissue, but the track seemed to dead end without going all the way through. This made no sense if the bullet had passed completely through Kennedy's body, as some witnesses had suggested. The doctors examined every inch of the body, searching for an exit wound they couldn't find, and became increasingly puzzled about what had happened to the bullet. Had it somehow remained lodged in the body? Had it fragmented into pieces too small to track? The mystery wasn't solved during the autopsy itself. It wasn't until the following morning when Dr. Humes placed a telephone call to Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas to speak with the doctors who had treated Kennedy in the emergency room, that he learned a crucial piece of information. The Dallas surgeons had performed an emergency tracheotomy, cutting directly through Kennedy's throat in a desperate attempt to help him breathe. In doing so, they had cut through what was actually a bullet wound in the front of the throat, completely destroying its original appearance and making it impossible for Humes to recognize it as an exit wound. The Dallas doctors had been focused entirely on trying to save the president's life, not on preserving evidence for a future autopsy, so they had no reason to avoid cutting through that area. But this meant that a critical piece of evidence had been permanently altered before the autopsy even began. Fact 10. The president's brain vanished. After the initial autopsy was completed, President Kennedy's brain was removed from his body and placed in a container for preservation and later examination. This is standard practice in cases involving head trauma, as the brain tissue needs time to firm up through a process called fixation before it can be properly sectioned and examined under a microscope. The brain was meant to undergo a detailed supplementary examination that would provide additional information about the nature and extent of Kennedy's wounds. It was stored at the National Archives along with other autopsy materials, where it should have remained available for any future investigations or reviews. But sometime in 1966, approximately 3 years after the assassination, the president's brain disappeared from its secured location. It has never been found, and its current whereabouts remain completely unknown more than 50 years later. The disappearance of such a crucial piece of physical evidence has fueled countless theories and questions about what might have been learned from further examination of the brain tissue and why anyone would want to make it disappear. The brain could have provided definitive information about the direction from which bullets struck Kennedy's head, the number of separate impacts, and other details that might have resolved ongoing controversies about the shooting. Some researchers have suggested that the brain might have shown evidence inconsistent with the official narrative of the assassination, making its disappearance suspicious. Others have proposed more mundane explanations, such as the Kennedy family requesting that it be buried with the president or destroyed to prevent it from becoming a morbid artifact. Whatever the reason, the missing brain represents one of the most significant gaps in the physical evidence from the assassination, and its absence has meant that certain questions about Kennedy's wounds can never be definitively answered. Fact 11. The brain weighed an impossible amount. According to the official autopsy report, President Kennedy's brain weighed 1,500 grams after it was removed from his skull for preservation and further examination. This might seem like an insignificant technical detail, but it became the source of serious questions and controversy among medical experts who reviewed the autopsy findings. The problem is that 1,500 grams represents a completely normal brain weight for an adult male. It's right in the middle of the expected range. But Kennedy had suffered massive trauma to his head, with a significant portion of his brain tissue and skull blown away by the fatal shot. Photographs and witness testimony from both the Parkland Hospital doctors and the Bethesda autopsy team described substantial loss of brain matter, with pieces of tissue scattered in the presidential limousine and on Dealey Plaza. Given this extensive damage and tissue loss, the brain should have weighed considerably less than a normal intact brain. The fact that the recorded weight was completely normal raised troubling questions about whether the measurement was accurate, whether the doctors had somehow made an error in weighing the organ, or whether something more sinister might have occurred. Some researchers have suggested that the discrepancy could indicate that a different brain was substituted at some point, though this theory ventures into speculation without concrete evidence. Others have proposed that the doctors simply made a mistake in their measurements, perhaps estimating the weight rather than actually weighing the organ, or recording what they thought it should weigh rather than what it actually weighed. The brain weight issue became one of many anomalies in the autopsy report that led experts to question the thoroughness and accuracy of the examination. Fact 12. The photographer says photos are wrong. Sandra Spencer worked as a photographer at the Naval Photographic Center and was responsible for processing the photographs taken during President Kennedy's autopsy. Her job was to develop the film, create prints, and ensure that the images were properly handled and stored. Decades later, in 1997, Spencer was called to testify under oath before the Assassination Records Review Board, which had been created to investigate remaining questions about Kennedy's assassination and to ensure that all relevant records were properly preserved and made available to researchers. What Spencer told the board was startling. She stated that the autopsy photographs currently stored in the National Archives and officially recognized as the genuine autopsy photos were not the same photographs she had developed back in 1963. She testified that the images she processed had been on different photographic paper than the photos now in the archives, and more importantly, that they showed different damage patterns than what she remembered from the images she had worked with. Spencer was very specific in her recollections, noting details about the type of paper, the quality of the images, and the nature of the wounds visible in the photographs. As a professional photographer who had worked with countless images during her career, she was confident in her ability to recognize her own work, and she was equally confident that these were not the photographs she had developed. Her testimony raised deeply troubling questions about whether the official photographic record of Kennedy's autopsy had been altered, whether additional photographs had been taken and then suppressed, or whether the chain of custody for this crucial evidence had been broken at some point, allowing the original photos to be replaced with different images. Fact 13. A movie triggered a congressional investigation. In December of 1991, director Oliver Stone released his controversial film JFK, starring Kevin Costner as New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison investigating the Kennedy assassination. The movie presented a dramatically different narrative than the official Warren Commission conclusions, suggesting a massive conspiracy involving multiple shooters and high-level government officials. While many historians and journalists criticized the film for taking significant creative liberties with the facts and presenting speculation as established truth, it had an enormous impact on public perception of the assassination. Millions of Americans who saw the film became convinced that the government had not been fully honest about what happened in Dallas, and many began demanding that all assassination-related records be made available to the public. The public outcry was so intense and widespread that Congress felt compelled to respond. In 1992, less than a year after the film's release, Congress passed the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act, which created the Assassination Records Review Board and mandated that all government records related to the assassination be reviewed and, unless there were compelling reasons for continued secrecy, released to the public. The review board spent years combing through government files, unsealing approximately 60,000 documents that comprised more than 4 million pages of previously classified or restricted material. While some records remained sealed for national security reasons, the vast majority of assassination-related documents were made available to researchers and the general public for the first time. This meant that a Hollywood movie, rather than a formal investigation or academic study, was directly responsible for one of the largest releases of government documents in American history and for renewed official examination of questions about Kennedy's death. Fact 14. The proper hospital was only 5 miles away. Years after the autopsy, Commander J. Thornton Boswell, one of the doctors who performed the examination of President Kennedy, was asked about the decision to conduct the autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital rather than at a more appropriate facility. His response was blunt and unequivocal. He called the decision stupid. Boswell explained that the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology was located just 5 miles away from Bethesda and was specifically designed for exactly this type of complex forensic examination. The institute had experienced forensic pathologists on staff who regularly dealt with gunshot wounds, criminal cases, and other violent deaths. They had specialized equipment, proper protocols already in place, and the expertise to handle every aspect of a forensic autopsy that would need to withstand intense scrutiny. The doctors at the institute would have known exactly how to document bullet wounds, track trajectories through tissue, preserve evidence for criminal prosecution, and create a record that could survive challenges in court and review by other experts. Instead, Kennedy's body was taken to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where the available pathologists were Humes and Boswell themselves, competent doctors, but lacking the specialized training this situation demanded. The decision appears to have been based more on the fact that Bethesda was a Navy facility and Kennedy had been a Navy officer during World War II, creating a sense that it was the appropriate place to bring him, rather than on any consideration of which facility had the best qualified personnel to conduct the examination. Boswell's frank acknowledgement that better options were available just a few miles away underscored how poor planning and a lack of coordination in the chaotic hours after the assassination led to consequences that would affect the investigation for decades. Fact 15, described as history's most botched autopsy. Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist who served as chairman of the Forensic Pathology Panel for the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the late 1970s, did not mince words when describing President Kennedy's autopsy. He called it the exemplar of botched autopsies, meaning it served as the prime example of how not to conduct a forensic examination. Baden's assessment was based on a comprehensive review of the autopsy report, photographs, x-rays, and all available evidence, giving him a complete picture of just how many errors and omissions had occurred during the examination. The failures were numerous and serious. The doctors had failed to properly dissect the president's neck to track the path of the bullet through that region, leaving crucial questions about wound trajectories unanswered. They had missed critical measurements that would have been standard in any competent forensic autopsy, making it difficult for later experts to precisely reconstruct what had happened. They had failed to photograph all of the wounds properly, with some angles and views missing entirely from the photographic record. They had not maintained proper chain of custody for evidence, allowing too many people into the autopsy room and creating opportunities for contamination or tampering. They had not adequately documented their findings in real time, instead relying on memory and later reconstructions. The list of failures went on, each one representing a violation of standard forensic practice. Baden's characterization of the autopsy as the worst example in history was not hyperbole or exaggeration. It was a professional assessment from one of the world's leading experts in forensic pathology, based on objective review of how the examination had been conducted compared to accepted standards in the field.